They may have entered financial difficulties in 2012 and declared bankruptcy in 2020, but guys, South African Airways is back. Not only is it back, but it's beginning to thrive once more, bringing their A330s back on long-haul routes, and their A350s are shortly behind that. We are here this morning at Johannesburg International Airport, where we're going to hop on board the A330 in the business class cabin up to Accra, Ghana. Our first stop today is Terminal A, where we're going to head up, of course, first to the aircraft viewing deck. Here they have an indoor viewing gallery with some stuff about Johannesburg and the airport, all ending in this wonderful panoramic view of the entire ramp of the OR Tambo International Airport. Even though most international traffic, including our flight, is departing out of Terminal A, South African Airways check-in currently resides in Terminal B entirely. My assumption is because due to the pandemic and the struggles they were facing, they were largely a domestic and short-haul carrier, meaning they could operate most of their flights out of Terminal B. However, I'm not sure if it was still there pre-pandemic or if it will continue to be there as they begin to grow once more. But if you know, go ahead and let me know down in the comments. But we did have to walk over to Terminal B, and that's where we are now, to check in for our flight to Ghana. I made my way to the far end with the Voyager Platinum and Premier check-in for South African Airways, where my flight was the only long-haul flight departing from this area. This man in the orange shirt decided he needed to show me how to get to this counter despite me already knowing where to go and not asking for his help. He walked me all the way there and held my hand while I checked in, and then demanded that I give him a tip, which is pretty normal in these African airports, but don't be afraid to just say no and walk away unless you truly feel that they gave you a special service that you couldn't have gotten otherwise. With that checked in, we did have to head back over to the international gates over in Terminal A. So past the main arrivals rotunda and onto Terminal A we went to immigration and security. Because there was no open business class lane, all passengers had to go through the same immigration lane, meaning it did take about a half hour to get through immigration and security, so factor that into the time you're allowing yourself. But then we were onto the terminal, where most signs are blocked by these shops, perfectly placed directly underneath the signage. This part of the airport wasn't exactly popping off. It was pretty calm this time of day. You can see here from the departure board there was only a couple flights at a time actually boarding or at the gate, which made it so that it wasn't super crowded and there was plenty of space in the shops and lounges. Here you can see some very large shops, mostly just handmade items from throughout Africa. There were a couple different ones, for example, out of Africa, and shortly further down the hallway you have this other one on your right side. Just past that, we find a sign for what seems like every airline to have ever existed, just in case you needed a little bit more help finding the lounge. Heading upstairs though, you'll find a number of airline lounges, including the Emirates Lounge, the British Airways Lounge, and amongst others, the South African Airways Crowning Lounge as well. The South African Airways Lounge is actually broken into two parts. On the left side is the Platinum Lounge, reserved for South African Airways highest status members. On the right side is the Premium Lounge, which is reserved for Star Alliance Gold members, Star Alliance Gold business class travelers, including those with a South African Airways business class ticket. So that's where we're going today, off to what is dubbed as the Baobab Lounge. Now the weird shape of their lounge does help it feel a little bit more private with a little bit less walls. Here you see the main dining room area, where you can see it separated into the bar area and the main seating area for dining, separated by a couple walls but still feeling pretty private. Past that, around the bend you find the smoker's lounge and a bunch more seating, which is still open but feels private just due to being around the corner from the rest of the dining options. This area stayed pretty much empty. My guess is because we were the only long-haul South African flight departing about this time. I for one was a fan of their self-serve pancake station, where you could drop some batter in there, watch it go through the steps, and then put whatever toppings on that you wanted. Down below we see the main part of the walkway of the terminal, and across from that up top you can see all the other lounges as you walk throughout. That one is specifically the British Airways Lounge on the other side. A great feature of this lounge is the audio-visual room, which is a wonderfully decorated room with large TVs, so that if you do want to watch something like the news or a TV show, or maybe just get some work done while something plays in the background, it's a great place for you to sit, and it's quite peaceful considering how quiet it is. We also saw a kids room, which had some gaming systems and some limited toys for those traveling with small children as well. Heading back through the lounge from there though, you can see passing the audio-visual room as we get back into the main dining area. As we head back here, you can see just how private it is as we walk through the workspace where a couple people were getting some work done before hopping on board their flight, and then getting into the main dining room part of the lounge. This is where I decided I would grab a seat so I could stake out a good window and eat my snacks before I got on board my flight. If you are able to get yourself a window seat, you'll have wonderful sweeping panoramic views of the ramp, similar to that we got at the aircraft viewing deck just outside security. From here you can see a bunch of aircraft coming in and out. One of those aircraft in particular is the TAG Angola Airlines 777-300, which is an airline that I'm really hoping to get on, considering at the current moment it's the only first class product offered in Africa until Air Côte d'Ivoire announces their A330neo first class service shortly, hopefully next year. This was also where I got my first view of our A330 that had arrived from Lagos the night before, currently awaiting our flight to Ghana. They do have a duty-free shop here in the case, and lounge employees are able to unlock that and pull out items for you to purchase if that's what you're looking to do in the lounge. As far as food goes, there's a couple different food stations scattered throughout the lounge. I got what I could before being told I could no longer film the food inside the lounge. They did have ratatouille, however, for all you Disney fans out there. And in this shot that could not have been framed any worse, you can see the bar that's in the lounge, which is not only where you get all the alcoholic drinks, but also where you get all the soft drinks. All I wanted was a Sprite, and the bartender gave me a similar drink here at the bar. Just past that, we find the food, which is split into a few different options. First thing you're going to come across is the salad and toppings bar for those that are looking for a little bit healthier of an option. Just past that's where you find more of the charcuterie board type options, and past that is the entrees, which I was not able to film because at that point I was told no longer could I take pictures of the food. After breaking my #1 golden rule of not getting completely stuffed before getting on board a business class flight, I sat here with my completely full stomach, watched a few more airplanes come in and out, before finally heading out of the lounge a little bit early just to walk around the Johannesburg airport and see what Terminal A looked like inside. Once you get here, you'll see that it is a pretty grand terminal. It offers great views of the ramp and the airplanes there. However, I couldn't help but realize that it felt a little bit empty. Part of that, in my opinion, is probably due to the fact that South African Airways used to have such a heavy wide-body fleet. That hopefully is coming back soon and will bring back this airport to its glory, but right now, it's really lacking the great national carrier that it once had. Speaking of that national carrier, here I got up close and personal with my A330 while they loaded it with food, bags, and cargo while we were still about 20 minutes out from boarding. Walking around this very empty terminal, I saw a few more exciting airplanes like this old heritage livery of the Lufthansa 747, a large number of interesting airplanes sitting out at hardstand, and then came the Qantas flight arriving from Perth, Australia on the 787-9, which I watched pull into the gate. Shortly thereafter, I headed to boarding gate A11, ready to board my flight over to Ghana. Now apparently what I learned since this flight is that there are some polarizing opinions on this cabin. I for one thought it was beautiful. The fake wood flooring and the red with the logo on the entry was beautiful. Upon actually entering the cabin, I thought the mixture of colors was a nice touch, something you don't always see. That red just pops right out at you, similar to that of Air Senegal in my opinion. The cabin is set up in a 1-2-1 configuration, alternating on the windows being closer or further from the window. The middles are just as close together, it's just that they shift slightly more to the left or to the right, row by row. Now let's take a look at a seat. My seat specifically, seat number 5A, which is one of those that's a little closer to the window and offers a little bit more privacy. I was luckily assigned this at check-in rather than being able to reserve it ahead of time. Sitting down in the seat, I found the details on the seat back to be wonderful, and it also came stocked with a nice quality pillow as well. In addition to the pillow, we were given a mattress pad and a comforter, both of which were wonderful. However, considering this flight was only about 7 hours, I didn't have such a great need to get some great sleep. But once those long haul services come back, you can bet you that I'd be using that mattress pad all day long. Now taking a nice little tour around the suite, with nothing really to my left, we'll start down by my feet where this nice little incline allowed a great space to rest my feet without them having to sit on the footrest for the bed mode. To the right of that was the literature pocket, which fit my laptop very nice with room to spare. And above that, next to the TV, was this little well, and for the life of me, I could not figure out what it was supposed to be for, maybe an iPad holder or something, but if you know, please let me know down in the comments. Above that, lastly, was your coat hanger. Immediately to my right was a countertop with a number of buttons, remotes, and controls, as well as some extra storage. First things first is the tray table here that pops out with the push of a button. Mine dragged on the bottom and so was very loud every time I had to put it in or out. Not the best once people had decided to sleep, but it's an average size tray table to say the least. This electric seat has 3 preset modes: sitting up, reclining, and lying flat. The same controls are available on the panel by the counter with an additional control to raise or lower the footrest. Above that is where you'll find one of the independent reading lights available for this seat as well. The remote that comes with this seat is similar to the 747-400 remotes that most airlines have, which has limited amounts of buttons, but if you're just trying to control the TV from your lie-flat position, it does allow you to do that without having to sit up. Above that, we see the only in-seat storage, unfortunately. However, it did prove handy. Luckily, there's plenty of space in the overhead bins to store your bags as well. In the back, you'll find this main well that can store plenty of devices and chargers or whatever you might need to use in the flight. Next to that is your USB port, your noise-canceling headset port, and your universal charging port as well. You can see with my laptop charger in the universal charging port, there is plenty of space to store it in the bucket as well. And possibly my biggest pet peeve nowadays on these long-haul airplanes is that they've stopped installing overhead individual air vents, which seems like an easy enough piece to include considering everybody runs hotter or colder comparatively, and having everybody controlled by the same air conditioning system just doesn't seem equal, but I'm not the one designing these airplanes. We were also given our choice of pre-departure beverage in the South African Airways branded glass, which of course I went for the champagne. It says something when the most outstanding part about a lavatory is the walls and the floors, as everything else is perfectly basic and average except for a nice design on the walls, and they carry that fake wood flooring throughout the floors. Just outside the lavatory, you can see the aft part of the business class cabin, which is only a few rows deep before reaching the rest of the cabin. Now, as we push back, taxi out to the runway, and watch this Air Belgium A330neo take its spot, just a quick story time. And that story is really just about the fact that South African Airways has always been a bucket list airline of mine. It's never been the most grand, but it's always just been something interesting to me. And so when they started struggling and losing their long-haul service and potentially going bankrupt, it made me kind of sad thinking that I'd never get the chance to travel on this airline. So now that I was in Africa, really traveling around Africa for the first time in my life, I had to make it a point to get down to Johannesburg and try out their business class product, considering that the long haul service was starting to come back. And I'm excited to say that after looking through things, it looks like they're going to be reviving their A350s, adding more service to the Americas, adding more services to Australia and South America as well. So I'm excited to see what times are to come for South African Airways, but until later, let's take to the skies. Instead of staring at this beautiful South African Airways wingtip for the entire flight, I figured I'd direct my attention to stare a little bit more at the South African Airways in-flight magazine a little bit more, which has some information about the different destinations that they fly to and different articles, including a map of their current destinations along with some code share destinations, which you can see at the current moment is largely just throughout Africa. After that, they had some timetables, followed by a page describing their current fleet, which had the A330 as their only long-haul aircraft, which I'm excited to see change soon. Then I wanted to take a look at some of the in-flight entertainment. Now, I had heard they didn't have the greatest selection, so I was curious to see what they did have on board. The main menu has the normal options like movies, TV, music, and games, so taking a look through that, first things first, starting with the movies, there was 54 options, which is not great, but I was hoping I could find some stuff in there, and I did. However, they're not exactly the common movies that you'd see on most airlines. A lot of them are a little more obscure, so none of them were exactly my first choice of things to watch, although it did keep me entertained. TV shows, the same thing, was about 60 options, and unfortunately a lot of them were international options, so I wasn't as familiar with them, but it did pass the Big Bang Theory test at the very least. Perhaps what I was most surprised about was the selection of music, with 130 different albums from all around the world, including some regions that they aren't currently flying to. In my opinion, they also had a wonderful selection of games, enough to keep anybody entertained for this flight. Now, even though the selection's not great, I love when you can add things to your favorites to help you find them a little bit later on in the flight. The map, however, was a little bit unfortunate considering it was not interactive. You could not move it around or zoom. It did scroll through different items, but you just had to let it do it on its own rather than you being able to control it yourself. Lastly, they did have an on-flight Wi-Fi showing in the Wi-Fi section of my phone. However, it wasn't actually pulling anything up, and when I did ask the flight attendant about it, she advised me that at this current moment, there is no onboard Wi-Fi on these South African Airways flights, although they are hoping to bring it back. Then came this wonderful amenity kit passed out by the flight attendants that I thought was beautiful, with this brown leather finish with the imprint of the South African Airways logo. Inside was pretty basic with socks, eye mask, and comb. I did like the earplug holder that came with it that I have reused since with different earplugs. It also came with a nice hand lotion and body lotion as well. Then they passed out the hot towels that were pretty much dry, not very moist at all, but at least it meant that meal service was soon approaching. I kicked off my meal with a lemonade, which is their equivalent of Sprite, and a bottle of water, which is also how I noticed the seat came with a water bottle holder. Found it strange that they didn't supply each seat with a water bottle, but looking in that side compartment, tucked away is a nice spot to store any water bottles that you do have. Interestingly enough, there were no in-flight menus. Instead, the flight attendants came around with carts to offer everybody either the fish, chicken, or veggie entree option. I may be a sucker for smoked salmon, but y'all, this first course was by far the highlight of my meal. I thought the cucumbers were super fresh, and the smoked salmon was amazing, and it was the greatest way to kick off this meal. Honestly, I thought the rest of the meal didn't quite match up to the starter. I went with the chicken entree. The chicken was a little bit bland and came with some veggies and rice. The veggies and rice were honestly my highlight of this dish. However, I just couldn't stop thinking about that smoked salmon entree. Give me some smoked salmon and you'll keep me happy. Dessert was one of those moments where, in all honesty, I couldn't really tell you what I was eating, but I could tell you it was good. It was almost like a panna cotta style cake, tasted like vanilla with a nice little chocolate piece on top, but if you asked me what it was, I honestly could not tell you. After dinner wrapped up, looking around the cabin, a couple things kept me entertained. First things first, it was only about 3/4 of the way full, which allowed me to get some great footage of the cabin, including some of these empty seats that were left over, especially in the aft cabin. In addition to that, a wonderful view of the sun setting behind the South African Airways A330 wingtip as we made our way into West Africa. Now, as the cabin finally went dark, I got some work done, including some videos, watched the new Elvis movie, and decided to just kind of enjoy my last couple hours on board this cabin. Now, as far as playing around with some of the different bed modes, I decided to take a look at the different modes with relaxing and lie flat, including the different bedding options and just how comfortable of a bed you can make. First things first here, this headrest you can see does move. It tilts up and down, so if you do want a little bit higher of a head, you don't need to worry about more pillows. All you need to do is tilt that headrest up, and it was fairly sturdy. With that pillow on top of it though, you do have a pretty good place to rest your head with plenty of room. Now taking a look at both the mattress pad and the comforter that was supplied with the seat. First things first, of course, we got to lay down the mattress pad, which made for a great way to cover up all of the different seams, curves, and bends of the seat to give you one nice, flat, smooth surface, and it went all the way down to the footrest. After that, laid down the comforter, which was a nice quality, plenty thick, and unfortunately I was too hot to use it. But if you do run cold, keep that in mind that this comforter will keep you warm. Now I thought the seat with the mattress pad was actually super comfy. The one drawback is that this footwell was honestly tiny. There was not a lot of space to move your feet around, especially if you do want to sleep on your side. So you really do have to sleep on your back and leave your feet in one fixed position. I also noticed as I looked around the cabin that there was some seats that were still lit up with this red and some seats that weren't, which means that it was now my mission to decide what turned these lights on and off, considering that there was no switch on the seat. I realized that as you recline the seat, the lights get darker and darker. So there's no button to turn these accent lights on and off. However, if you do want a dark light, all you have to do is recline the seat to the point when you're in fully lie flat mode, there's no more light. And when you're in full sitting up mode, the light still remains pretty bright. After being in the air for 4.5–5 hours, we were already making our descent into Ghana after a short flight, which meant the cabin crew was preparing the cabin for arrivals, not before I got one more trip to the restroom and noticed something about row 1 of this cabin. Now, it's no secret that on some airlines, row 1 allows you a little bit more room, considering that you're not wedging yourself underneath someone else's seat. South African Airways is no exception, as the footwell is much larger in row 1. So if you're looking for a little more comfort, row 1 might be where you want to sit. The only drawback is that row 1 is a little bit closer to the aisle if you're on a window seat, meaning that the counter is between you and the window, and you also have someone walking right past you every time they need to go to the bathroom. Descent was when it really got fun. You can see the rain here flying across my window. The storm had hit. I mean, you can see the clouds all around the city. It was above us, below us, and all around us. We saw lightning striking throughout the entire arrival. If you continue watching, you'll see the lightning striking all around us, and I had to assume that we were flying around the lightning. However, there was one point where the lightning got a little too close for comfort, right as we were on our final approach into Accra. Now, show of hands, who thinks that in a thunderstorm, the best move would be to deplane outside on metal air stairs? No one? Yeah, that's probably about right. Because if there was thunder and lightning at an airport, I would assume they'd want you in a covered surface. They'd want you inside, just like they have the rampers go inside when there's thunder and lightning. However, South African Airways had one more surprise in store for us today. That surprise involved us parking at a hard stand, getting the metal air stairs out in a thunderstorm for passengers to get out, get on their buses, and go to the terminal. Made me a little bit uncomfortable, but there wasn't really any other alternatives, so I just had to play the game of odds and get on board my bus and inside to the terminal. And now for my final reflections of the South African Airways business class on the A330. In my opinion, the hard product gets a 10 out of 10. I think the seat's beautiful and it's super comfortable as well. However, the soft product in my book gets a 5 out of 10 probably at best. I think the service is very reminiscent of the COVID times, and I'm hoping that they can grow out of this. This also wasn't exactly the longest flight in the world, so I'm hoping that maybe once they resume their service to the Americas and whatnot, that we might see an increase in their service, something like at least menus or in-flight Wi-Fi. So that soft product is where I think South African Airways still has plenty of space to improve, and I do think they will. I think that we will see that in the years to come. So hopefully they can revamp that and South African Airways can become once again one of the greats of Africa, up there with Kenya Airways and Ethiopian Airlines as well. And after narrowly avoiding getting struck by lightning, I had finally made it into the terminal, got my bag, and I was into the country of Ghana, where I have to say that I would love to try South African Airways again sometime, maybe once they bring back the A350 and once they bring back the longer haul service, so I can see if that does improve their service at all, as I'd be curious to see if they can match the standards that we know and expect now on business class long haul routes. But in the meantime, my last tip I want to leave you guys with is if you are staying in Accra overnight and you need to stay near the airport, the Holiday Inn is what I recommend, specifically because they have this wonderful office right outside the airport exit. They'll call the airport shuttle for you, they'll bring you to the hotel just a few minutes away. All in all, I was at my hotel within about 10 minutes of leaving baggage claim. But with that being said, safe travels, and I'll see y'all next time.